So we introduced methods in topic 1, but we're going to dive a bit deeper into methods in this video. So just as a bit of a revision, remember method names use lower camel case. Now I'm going to talk a lot about naming conventions, and I'm going to keep going on and on about naming conventions throughout the whole session. The reason why is Java dictates how we name things. So if you get a job in Australia or America or England or India or China or wherever, everybody is going to name their methods, their classes, their variables the same way. So method names use lower camel case. Lowercase for the first word, then uppercase, lowercase, uppercase, lowercase. That's why they call it lower camel case or upper camel case. You get these little humps where the uppercase letters are. Now we talked about last week, and we're going to discuss it again now, that methods have signatures, and signatures have 3 parts. A return type, the name of the method, and the type and names of the parameters the method requires. So let's have a look at that. In my class, remember instance variables are at the top, then my constructors. We know these are constructors because they have the same name as the class and they have no return type. But then we get to the methods. So return type, method name, parameters if any. So this one returns an int. Because it returns an int, it needs a return statement. Return type. This one does not return anything, but we need to say that. We need to give it a return type of void. It means that it doesn't return anything, but it still has a return type in the method signature. Then the method name, and then the parameters. And you can see the same thing is followed. Return type string, method name, parameters in the brackets if there are any. Return type, method name, parameters. This is the parameter type and the parameter name. Parameter type, parameter name. Have a look at these ones down the bottom. Return type, method name, parameters, parameter type, parameter name, parameter type, parameter name. This is very important because when we look at a method, we know what it is going to do because of the name, and we know what it returns because of the return type, and we know if we need to pass it anything because of the parameters. So you should name your methods with a descriptive name. We know update student. It's probably going to update the student. Print details. Maybe a better name would have been print student details, but it gives you an idea of what the method is going to do. And that way, when I create an object, like I have an object here, and I look at the method, I don't need to look at the code. I know that this one here, string, get email address, it's going to return a string, more than likely the email address. You know, this one here, print details, it's not going to return anything, but it's going to print something. So methods always follow this same convention. Now, there are some special types of methods, and we didn't talk about this last week. We'll talk about it now, and these are called accessor methods and mutator methods. So methods that return information to the caller about the state of an object are called accessor methods. And accessor methods usually start with get. Sometimes they'll be called getters. So you might hear me talk about getters. If I talk about a getter, I'm talking about an accessor method. They start with get because they're getting some information. So methods that change the state of an object are called mutator methods. They're changing the state. Mutator methods usually start with set. So you might hear me talk about setters. So mutator methods and setters are the same thing. Accessor methods and getters are the same thing. So let's have a look at this. So we know the state of the object are the values that are stored in the instance variables. So when I look at this student class, the state of the object, there are these values here. And remember, we can look at the state of an object by inspecting it. We can see the values that are stored in the instance variables. And remember I said earlier, instance variables should always be private. Why should they be private? Well, private means they're not accessible outside of the class. That means nothing outside of this class can access these. Well, why would you want to do that? It gives us protection, and we'll talk about that more in a minute. So we make our instance variables private. Now you could make them public. Java wouldn't complain, but it's a very poor programming practice and you will lose marks if you do that. And in the real world, you would never do that. You always make your instance variables private. So let's have a look at this age one here. Private int age. So if it's private, how does someone get the value? Well, they use the accessor method. So here's the accessor method. Remember, accessor methods start with get. Because it's called age, I would call the accessor method getAge. Just like this one here, getName. Well, it's getting the name. So getAge, the variable is called age, so I'd call it getAge. And it returns an int. It returns an int because age is an int. And here we go, it returns the age. So when someone calls getAge, it's going to return the value of the age to them. So they can access it through the accessor method, through the getter. And that naming convention is followed. Have a look further on. Get email address. It's called email address, so the accessor is called get email address. This is called grade point average, so the accessor would be called get grade point average. It would, in that case, return a double, and it would return grade point average. But mutator methods, they change the state of an object. So have a look at this setAge. So a mutator, because it's going to change the value of the instance variable, we need to pass a parameter. The accessor doesn't need a parameter. It doesn't need you to pass it anything. It's returning you something. But the mutator is changing the value of the instance variable. So we have to pass a new value. Now we talked about this. Anytime you see this dot with a variable name, it's referring to one of the instance variables. So this dot age equals this age here, the instance variable age. Likewise, this dot name in the mutator for the set name, this dot name refers to this name here. So in the age, I'm passing it a parameter of age. I'm saying this dot age equals age. So what I'm saying is this dot age, so this age up here, equals the age here that I pass. So I'm changing the value of the instance variable. Now this is why we always use accessors and mutators, and this is why we make our instance variables private. Because if I was to make age public, I could write anything I wanted to it. So another class could write 1,000,000 minus 100,000, things that aren't valid for an age. But because I only allow access to it through methods, so my mutator changes the value, my accessor gets the value, because I only allow that variable to be changed in a method, I can do some error checking. Now this is an if statement. We're going to talk more about that in an upcoming video. But what I'm saying here is if age is greater than 0 and age is less than 100, then set the age, else print out an error statement. So I have control over what's written to it. If this was public, another class could write anything it wants to it. But because I only allow a mutator to change its value, I can do some error checking. So what I'm saying is only change its value if age is greater than 0 and less than 100, because they're the only valid values I want written to the age. So it gives us control, and we can see how this works. So if I look here, if I get the age, it's 0. So now I want to set the age. So remember, get the age just returned an int, and we saw it just returned an int. Set the age, it requires a parameter, integer age. Look, set age, integer age, integer age. So I'm going to pass a new age. I'll pass 50. Okay. Get the age. It's now 50. So the getter returns it, the setter sets it. Remember, the getter is the accessor, the setter is the mutator. But watch what happens if I try to do this, and I recommend you always have your terminal open, and you'll be able to see what's going on. Watch what happens if I try to set it to a value that's too large. 500. Okay, the age is incorrect. And that was printed out because of my print line statement. We'll talk about that in a video in a minute. So now if I get the age, it's still 50. It didn't get set because I have control over it. So the accessor and mutator methods, they're methods that either return information about the state of the object or change the state of the object. So they're very special methods.